to Claire Baldry.
Right, I'm Claire Baldry. I am yet another retired head teacher. I live in Bexhill, actually, but for 2 years I was advisory teacher for English for the whole of East Sussex. So you've had the maths, and now you're getting the English. I'm actually now a full-time carer for my husband. He's got dementia and Parkinson's, but when I have spare time, I try and raise some funds for local charities and community groups. So that's why I describe myself as a lightweight performance poet. We got there. Okay, now I know which button to press. Because I write rhyming poetry and perform it, I do like to dress up in an outfit with a hat, so I've got an example for you here. It is quite a nice outfit, but I do sometimes get mistaken for a film extra for Harry Potter. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, what I'm going to talk about today is promote an appreciation of rhyme in poetry. Because I think over the last 80 years or so, rhyme's had a bit of a bad press, as somehow inferior to free verse. So I've chosen the title, Does It Have to Rhyme? Because of this book. Now, this book was written by someone called Sandy Brown-John, who was an educationalist, and she wrote it for primary schools in the 1980s. It was extremely useful. Any primary school teachers here will probably have used it. But one of its theories was that you should discourage children from rhyming, because if they rhyme, it doesn't get them let to have enough meaning or not. To a certain extent, that's true, because children don't rhyme very well, but it sort of puts rhyme down the priority list. So that's why I chose the title. And before we carry on, I think we need a definition of what poetry is. So here's a definition from the Collins Dictionary, which is poetry is an arrangement of words written or spoken in a style more concentrated and imaginative and powerful than that of ordinary speech or prose, some in metre and some in free verse. I'd say that's as clear as mud, really. So, does poetry have to rhyme? No, of course it doesn't. It doesn't have to rhyme. But I think rhyme is cool, so I'm going to try and give it a bit of a push. Before we do that, we'll have a little definition of free verse. Free verse being, of course, poetry which doesn't have much metre and rhyme. And the theorists would say, well, that's better, because you're not restricted by the rhyme, and therefore you can get loads more meaning in it. Free verse. Many forms of irregular, syllabic, or unrhymed verse freed from the demands of metre. Freed from the demands of metre implies that metre and rhyme are somehow inhibiting. So I had a bit of fun. Free verse really just puts the words together however you want them to go, and if you read it significantly enough, you can persuade people that it has meaning. I'm not in any way trying to diss really good free verse, but this is one. I went onto the website and I took a little excerpt off the bit about wedding receptions on the Kino website and decided to turn that into a bit of free verse. I have to read it with lots of meaning. So here we go. The wedding reception, spread out into our spacious gallery and restaurant area, a visual feast, buzzing with creativity, quirkiness, and charm. There we are, we have some free verse about the Kino. I think you could give that to a little group of literary poetry people, and they might discuss it for several minutes before they realised it was an absolute load of rubbish. Anyway, there we are. So we're now going to look at people who have really promoted rhyme and been good at it. Here is number one. Right, this person was described as a lightweight versifier who lacks serious merit. Have a look at a photo. Anyone know who that is? That's John Betjeman, That's how he was described. At first, he wasn't allowed to be Poet Laureate because they didn't think he was serious enough, but in the end, he got it. So we're going to have a little look at one of his poems. We've got there. Right, I'm only giving you excerpts from the poetry today because that way I'm not in breach of copyright. So if you think, why isn't she giving us the whole poem? That's why. She's just getting little tasters. Right, this is John Betjeman's poem, Slough. Come, friendly bombs, and fall on Slough. It isn't fit for humans now. There isn't grass to graze a cow. Brilliant poem. Who are we going to talk about next? This person, they said, she didn't write proper poetry. Want to have a guess? Pam Ayres, absolutely. Here she comes. Pam Ayres. What I would say about Pam Ayres is that I know some people think she's quite lightweight, but she actually made money from her poetry. Very popular, loads of pleasure to loads of people. So I'm going to read a little bit of one of Pam Ayres' poems, just to give you a lift about rhyme. She does change this poem, actually, when she performs it, depending on the context. But I think with the election coming up, this is quite good. This is called, They Should Have Asked My Husband. I cannot do a Pam Ayres accent. Sorry. Well, they should have asked my husband. He's a man who likes his say, with his thoughts on immigration, teenage mums, Theresa May, the future of the monarchy, the latest Brexit shocks, the wait for hip replacements, and the rubbish on the box. Yes, they should have asked my husband. He can sort out any mess. He can juvenate the railways. He can cure the NHS. So any little niggle, anything you want to know, just run it past my husband. Wind him up and let him go. Right, now the next poet actually did rhyme, but he was not, people weren't so negative about him. And I wondered why, and I think it's because he is just such a good poet. Anyone know who this is? It's W.H. Auden. But it could have been Stephen Spender. So here's W.H. Auden, and we'll have a look at his very famous poet, which we all grew to love in Four Weddings and a Funeral. And we'll have an excerpt from Stop the Clocks. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. I mean, I wish I could write like that. It's an absolutely fabulous poem. But the rhymes, it's so low-key, you hardly know it's there. But he does write rhyming poetry. What I'm going to talk about now is how rhyme has begun to get more popular, thank goodness, because we had some things happen in the second half of last century which added popularity to rhyme. The first thing we had in the 60s, the Liverpool poets. Here's one. Recognise him? That's Roger McGough, yes. And we'll have a little excerpt from Roger McGough. The trouble with snowmen, said my father one year, they are no sooner made than they just disappear. We also have had a lot of performance poets who are much more popular than they used to be. Now, I'm not going to get you to guess this one because I think everyone will know who it is. Here we have John Cooper Clarke and a little excerpt from his poem, I Wanna Be Yours. Let me be your vacuum cleaner, breathing in your dust. Let me be your Ford Cortina, I will never rust. Brilliant poem. Another people who have come along and who are rhyming and bringing rhyme to be more popular are rappers. So I had a little look for rappers and decided that probably the most popular one was Eminem. And I have got a little excerpt from Eminem of his rap, Not Afraid. I'm not going to read it to you because I just can't do rap, so you can read it. It's coming up now. It's also about the only excerpt from Eminem that I could find that would be suitable before the watershed. So here we are, just have a little look at that. I can't bring that one to life. And I'm going to give you one more example of someone who's brought rhyme to the fore, and I call her part of a group of hidden poets. Anyone know who that is? That's Julia Donaldson. Well, we wouldn't immediately say this is a poet, would we? But actually, she is the expert at rhyming. Here we go, from the Gruffalo. But who is this creature with terrible claws and terrible teeth in his terrible jaws? He has knobbly knees and turned out toes and a poisonous wart at the end of his nose. His eyes are orange, his tongue is black. He has purple prickles all over his back. She has just brought the pleasure of rhyme to generations of children, even though we don't say immediately that she is a poet. And in case you're getting fed up, we come to the words, and finally. I do write a lot of poetry myself. I've resisted the temptation to give you a lot of that today and to promote my own poetry, but I am going to indulge myself with one of my poems now. It's almost arrogant to put that alongside the greats that you've seen, but nevertheless, I'm going to do it. Tell you a story first. I belong to a group of writers called the Bexhill Quills. We have writing groups which meet, and we regularly talk about writing poetry. And with great apologies to Akiva, I'm about to talk about a maths teacher, okay? In 2018, I went along to one of these writing workshops that we ran, and there was only me and one other person there. We were at West Station in Bexhill. Now, the other person there had only written one book, and it was a maths book about quadratic equations. So I sat there at this writing workshop thinking, I don't think that the other person who's written the maths book and me that writes light-hearted rhyming poetry are going to have a lot in common. I think we're going to find this tough. But as it happened, we didn't. Because this gentleman, whose name was Simon, was also an horologist. He mended clocks. And he was in the process of mending the clock at West Station in Bexhill, where I was. Here it is. And he told me a story. He told me how, when Beeching, the man we love to hate, closed West Station in the 1960s, it was the job of the station staff to wind the West Station clock. So when they closed the station, there was no one to wind up the clock anymore, and the clock stopped. And he gave me this beautiful image of the last train heading out of Bexhill West Station and the hands of the clock slowly stopping. And I said, Simon, that's just a wonderful image. I would really like to write that. So I wrote the poem, and when they actually restarted the clock in 2018, I was invited along to share that poem. So I'm going to indulge myself now. This is it. When I finish this, I'm finished. This is called the West Station Clock. Did you hear the train sound its final adieu on that 60s occasion, as it pulled from the platform in Bexhill's West Station, with a chip and a chirp and a blast and a burst, disappear down the line towards distant Crowhurst? Did you see the clock? A valedictory turn of the hands and a wave from the vendors on newspaper stands, with a click and a clunk and a tick and a tock. Then time stood still for the West Station clock. Did you notice the winders hold back the tears as they sadly descend, whisper words of farewell to their time-keeping friend, with a sob and a sigh, till their hearts touch the floor, turn their backs on the spindle and fasten the door? Did you feel the years pass? They were gone in a blink. They destroyed the old rail tracks to build a new link, with a rev and a beep and a flash of road rage, while the clock simply waited to turn a new page. Did you glimpse the menders climb the tower to explore the insides of the clock with a will to learn more, with a creak and a crunch and a clearing of throats as they coughed, till they lifted the timepiece and held it aloft. Did you spot the returners? Set the clock back in place so the whole of Bexhill could stare up at its face. From the turn of a screw and a skilled operation, our timekeeping phoenix came back to the station. Turn your eyes clockwards, give thanks to horology. On behalf of Sir Beeching, we send an apology. With a shed load of joy, we rejoice in your fate, now that Bexhill clock watchers need never be late. Thank you very much.
Can you stay there for some questions?